Hello YouTube. Thought I'd do a quick video here. I've gotten a couple requests to do another video more in depth on how to use the USB Soundcard Oscilloscope that I posted a video on, I don't know, a few weeks ago. So we're going to kind of show you a little bit more how to set this up and how to use this. We're going to start with what I recommend you do is you buy a USB sound card. They're $3, free shipping. They're cheap. The reason being I suggest doing that is because if for some reason you accidentally send voltage into this, you'd rather wreck a $3 sound card than the sound card that's in your computer. So I highly suggest you buy a sound card, USB sound card. They're cheap. They're if you wreck it, you throw it away and you buy a new one. Okay, so that's the first thing you got to do. Now in this particular case, in this video, I have an extension hooked up. You don't need this. I just did this so that I can have a better camera view for the video. This goes back to my USB port on my computer. So this cable here is not needed. But we do need the USB sound card for the oscilloscope. This is what we're going to be using, the hardware we're going to be using to make the oscilloscope work. Okay. The next thing you're going to need, either you can buy a cable. You're going to need a 3.5 millimeter cable. It can be stereo here. Stereo's got the two black rings. Probably can't really see that well. Let's try this. Well, kind of better, but you get the idea. Okay. Now you can buy a cable and cut the other end off if you choose to. Or if you know how to solder, you can buy just a 3.5 millimeter plug and solder your own wires on it. The only thing that you need to know, if you know how to solder, you probably have an ohm meter. But we need to make sure this back sleeve here is ground. So you got to make sure whatever wire you use, whatever color of wire, if you're going to solder this, that's the ground wire. How this plug works is it's a stereo plug, so it's got right speaker out, left speaker out, and then the ground, which is usually way in back. And I'm not sure which is right and left, but that don't matter. But that's why there's three sections of this plug. So ground, right speaker out, left speaker out. So, but we're going to be using this cable on the microphone part of the US dongle. We got to feed the signal into the computer, into the software. So now if you choose to buy a cable and you're going to cut the end off, what you're probably going to end up with is a cable that's going to have a shielded wire kind of wrapped around the other wires. That shielded wire is the ground. Okay? So what you do is you can separate this wire and then twist it together so it looks like this. So that bare wire you see, that's our ground wire. And it's important we have the ground wire because the software is picky about which wire is ground. So we need that ground wire. So that's how you do that. So now, like I said, we're going to plug this cable into the microphone into here. The microphone spot on the USB sound dongle microphone. Next, we're going to start the software up. Now, this is the first time running it. You will see a message. This is freeware. If it's not for commercial use, you just hit continue. So, just to let you know that. And then we hit continue. Now we're going to move this over so that you can kind of see it better here. Okay, when you first run it, first thing you want to do, we just want to use one channel. So right here where it says channel 2, which is red, we want to uncheck that. We just want one channel, which is going to be green. So the line that we're going to use is green. The settings are going to be green. Green. So we just want one channel. We want the other one grayed out. If it's not grayed out, if you see it like this, for whatever reason, then hit the sync button to gray it out. We don't care about channel 2. We just want channel 1. The next thing we got to go to is settings. Now, this is important. The input is the USB sound card that we're using. Input is the microphone. In my case, it's going to be microphone 7 USB audio device. I have more than one microphone. I have more than one USB microphone hooked up. As I'm talking to you now, I have a USB headset. Well, I don't want to select that one because that's not what I want it to be, this USB dongle. So in my case, it's going to be microphone 7 for the input. Output, we don't care about for this particular video, but for the input, we got to have the microphone for the USB dongle that we have plugged in. Okay? Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set this to 10 millivolts. We're going to set, this is, like I said in another video, this is how many squares, how many volts per division, how many squares. But that's for sound purposes. You probably are not going to really care how many squares you have up and how many squares down. But we want to set this so that it's more sensitive. And I'll show you why, and I'll explain here once we get going on the video. But set it to 10 millivolts. Everything else here, leave at default, like you see here. Trigger, auto, rising edge. Make sure it's, when you have this on off, see how it wants to save it. So when it's running, it's going to be a green light, so make sure that's on green. Okay? So now, the next thing we want to do. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can either get a microphone and talk into it, another two-way radio to feed audio. I like to use a tone. And the reason being is, let me show you why. And I can easily show you by going to here, and I'm going to show you why I'd rather use a tone. I'm going to select my headset that I'm on now. You can see it's already going. But when you use voice audio, it's very hard to see if it's there or not. Yes, that's fine. I have audio, I can see it. But if you want it so that you don't have to talk into the microphone all the time or say audio, audio, testing 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, it's very hard to get an accurate reading. You don't always need an accurate reading, but to save on your voice, I like to inject a tone. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to go back to, this is what a voice looks like, and actually I have it set kind of sensitive, so if I turn this down, there we go. See how it's not going off the screen? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? So that's how, I'll explain more about that in a little bit. You'll see what I mean. But we're going to leave it at 10. Okay? Now I'm going to go back because I want to change it. I don't want the microphone that I'm talking on. I want the USB sound card. We want to do some checking here. So I got to go back and select this to the other USB microphone. Okay? Now what we're going to do, now go back to the scope. Now, the website I like to use, I mentioned in my other video, I'll post a link down below, is an online tone generator. I like to type in 1000 hertz. I like a sine wave. I like to have the volume up here, halfway on the screen. And we're going to hit play. Now, I don't know if you can hear that or not in the background. It's playing over my monitor. It's a tone. So, what we're going to do now is I'm going to use, let's minimize this. I'm going to use the speaker out headphone jack on the computer to do my tone. So you're going to need, if you want to do this, you're going to need another 3.5 millimeter plug. Okay? And we're going to plug this in. I'm going to turn the camera here so you can actually see what I'm doing. I'm going to plug this in into the laptop speaker headphone jack out because I want to use the tone. I don't want to sit there and say audio, audio, audio. So when I plug this in, okay, it's going to come up on my computer. Yours may not do this. Some don't, some do. But it's going to come up here. I'm going to hit OK. Now I have the tone coming out of my speakers going to these out this cable to here. Okay, I got fancy and I soldered on little alligator clips and little probes. You don't have to do that, but that's what I did. Okay. So now we're going to turn the camera back to the USB. Okay. So now if I take this cable and I know which one's ground and I hook up my tone that's to the cable that's coming from the computer like I just showed you, I'm going to hook the ground to ground and I'm going to hook the positive. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you use whichever wire. If you got 3 wires coming out, it doesn't matter. I'm showing you this now. I can do any wire. Okay? I can do any wire. What does matter is the ground. If I flip the ground, it doesn't seem to like that, and you won't get an accurate reading. See how much smaller it looks on the screen? So make sure you have your ground wires right. So we'll put that back. And then we're going to put it back there. Okay? So there. So I'm injecting a tone to this USB sound card, and it's displaying it on the screen you see now. Now, since I'm using the sound card in the laptop to do the tone, the volume on the laptop is going to make a difference. So if I go to here and I adjust this volume, watch on the scope. See, I can change the amplitude by adjusting the volume. The speaker out on the computer, I can adjust this. And also I got to make sure I have this on speaker headphone, not anything else. Because I want the tone coming out the headphones that's on the computer. Okay? Now here's where I was telling you to put this so it's sensitive. And the reason I say that, to do that right away, and if it's more than that, it'll go off the screen. It doesn't hurt anything. As you can see, it's completely off the screen. But the reason why I say that, because here is what can happen if you don't have it set sensitive. Let's say, for an example, I'm testing a circuit and it's got very small sound. So I'm going to turn the volume down, and then I'm going to turn this amplitude up all the way to 1. Well, it looks like I have no sound now. But there is sound. It's just that I have these adjustments so high the scope cannot display it. So that's why I recommend you always start with 10 millivolts. You can, if you need to see the waveform more, you can always, let me demonstrate this. You can always, let's crank this up. You can always turn the amplitude down or turn the amplitude up on the scope program to get it to fit if you need to do that. Okay, this is what a 1 kilohertz sine wave looks like. So now I'm ready to test my circuit. I got the scope operating correctly because I'm injecting the sine wave. and that way I can adjust my scope settings. You don't want to assume, you don't want to plug your USB in there and plug in your cable and turn the scope program on and say, okay, it's working, and you start testing for sound, and then the scope says there's no sound, and then you spend hours and hours, and then later you find out you didn't have your scope set up correctly. This is what you do to set your scope up. Now I know my scope is set up correctly. I'm going to put this back down to 10 millivolts. Now I'm going to unhook the sine wave. Now if I take these leads or wires and now I hook them up to a circuit to test, one's ground, one's positive. Now I can use my little probes here to test a circuit, audio circuit. And if I see something, I'll see in the scope. Okay? We got the scope set up correctly. We know it's going to work. That's the kind of purpose of doing this with this tone, so we can adjust everything, make sure we got the sound card selected correctly to make sure everything's looking good. And I'm hooking my tone back up. So this tells me I have my scope, I have everything set correctly. I have the right sound card, I have the right input microphone USB, I have everything set correctly, and I see a sine wave. So I know I'm ready now to use this little scope program and these little probes to go ahead and test the circuit I need to test for sound. One goes on ground, one goes on the pin that you want to check for sound. Whether it's a DB9 connector, whether it's, you're testing coming out of a headphone jack or something. Now we're set because we got the scope set up to work properly. Okay. Now, if you want to get real fancy, you don't have to do this, but it's good to know. I'm going to show you. We're going to hook up that tone again. We're going to hook up the tone. Okay. If you go to here to measure and you hit this and you hit hertz and volts, and then we check frequency, voltage. Now we don't really care about the frequency, but volts peak to peak, you can see how much sound is coming out. And I have it right now, it's coming out about 422.6 millivolts. Okay, which is pretty good, pretty high. Of course, I can adjust that higher because I remember I'm using the tone on here, so I can really crank it up. Watch the number go up to 1 volt peak to peak. That's getting really high. But I can go real low, and this thing will this software will still pick it up. See that? The lower it is, the lower you got to adjust your amplitude if you want to see it more. Okay, now I'm getting about 6.9 millivolts peak to peak. That means peak to peak, like I said in another video, each box, in this case, each box is about 9 millivolts. So you take, it's about, let's make it easier like this. Let's get a little more in here. Let's go about 1 there. Okay, so now if I turn this down, or up, I should say, we're about approximately 950 millivolts per box. So peak to peak means the total of the top box above the 0 reference line and the box below that. So we're just about, it's pretty much, about a half a volt here, half a volt here. That's how it gets approximately 1 volt peak to peak, if you really want to know that. In your case, if you're just checking to see if sound's there, you don't really need to know all this, but I'm just mentioning it to you anyways. So that's how you get your scope up and running. It's not that difficult. Works really good. It's great for quickly checking sound. Like I said, to check sound, you don't really need to know all this other detail. You just want to see the sound is there or not. In this case, let's pretend like I was testing this circuit. Okay, let's say I was injecting a 1 kilohertz tone in a circuit. So then I would just take my probe and I would touch the circuit here, and then I'll see the sound on the screen here. Easier said than done when you're trying to do a video. But if I was touching this, there it is. Okay, so again, we got the scope set up correctly. It's ready to go. Now I need the ground wire and one of the other wires. If you got a 3 cable, one of the other wires is your little, you can use it as a little probe now. Now you can go ahead and do your testing. Like if I was testing this DB9 connector here, okay, and let's say I find the ground pin and I have it labeled here, which is going to be right here. Pin 5 is ground. So I take the ground from my USB dongle to here, and then I take the other probe and I go to the sound pin, whether it's a microphone or whether it's a speaker out. I can go ahead and touch it on here. So that's how you would check to see if you have sound coming out of a DB9, depending on how you have your DB9 hooked up. But that's just one example. Or if you have a two-way radio, let's grab one here. Let's see what I got here. Let's just grab any radio here. Okay, let's just grab one here. And let's say I have a jack plugged in here. I'm on the speaker out, okay? And I want to make sure there's sound coming out of this plug. Once it's plugged in, obviously it disables the speaker in here. It disables the speaker. So I want to make sure I have sound. So then I would take the cable and then take the USB dongle, and then now I would hook them up to test the sound to see if I have sound. Or if I don't have sound, maybe the volume on the radio is too low and I need to turn it up. Or if it's distorted, you'll see, it being cut off like I talked about in the other video. So that's how you do that. Pretty simple. Once you kind of figure out the main thing you got to know is to make sure you select the USB dongle. Have a cable that's plug. You can plug in a cable. Find your ground wire, and then just set this to 10 millivolts, so it's sensitive. You can, who cares if it goes off the screen? And then, like I said, the settings here, make sure this input microphone is set to the US dongle that you're using. That's pretty much the main thing you got to worry about. I like to verify it's working, so I like to use the Tone website to double check that I have everything hooked up correctly. I don't want to second guess myself, so I prefer to use the Tone website. And I'm going to hook it back up here to make sure my scope is working and I know I have everything working great. So I prefer to do that. You don't need a Tone, but it just makes it easier to make sure everything's working. So I'll post the links to the Tone website. I'll post the links to where you can buy this USB dongle. I'll post all those links in the description down below. So I hope this video will help you, get you up and running. If you have any questions or comments, please post them down below. And please subscribe, and thank you, and have a good day.